What is up, LobotomizeGang? Is the guy, and this is Skull Guy. Welcome.
Demonetize this mother.
To preface this video, I'd like to say that I know that Ghost of Yotei is a game and it's a fantasy, so it doesn't have to be realistic. And I am not saying that it has to be realistic. And that's not the point of the video. This video is more of an investigation into whether or not a female Ronin existed in real life. In order to do that, we're going to go over a few points here, look at some documented records of female warriors in feudal Japan and the role of a woman in Japanese society, do some theory crafting, and finally put them all together to come to the answer. And I gotta say, some of the information I found here just genuinely caught me by surprise. So buckle up, we're gonna go a little bit crazy, we're gonna get wild. Because I haven't slept in 2 days and I just had a shot of espresso straight into the arteries. With the Tokyo game shows came the reveal for Ghost of Yotei, the sequel to Ghost of Tsushima, arguably one of the most beautiful depictions of feudal Japan. With Ghost of Yotei came the introduction of Atsu, our main female protagonist, who is also a Ronin. Just like clockwork, not even 10 minutes went by before the comments started to emerge from the pits of hell that is Twitter. I am not sure that I can show these comments on YouTube. They feel illegal, right? Some of these are just straight up harassment, sexist stuff. I'm not gonna show them, alright? But on the receiving end of those comments is the actress for Atsu, Erika Ishii. From my research, Erika is anti-Trump supporter. Also, she's a very vocal member of the LGBT community. And of course, when you have an actress who is so vocal about gender politics, it is easy to see how gamers are worried. It didn't help that many people at Sucker Punch are members of the LGBT community. Does this mean that Atsu from Ghost of Yotei is going to be a gaslight Girlboss Mary Sue? Well, we just don't know yet. While I do understand the concerns surrounding the actress, it would be wise, just for the time being, to chill out a little bit, to take a step back and look at the situation here, simply for the fact that we don't know much about the game at this moment, All we have is a very short reveal trailer that tells us basically nothing but the setting of the game and the main character being a female Ronin, alright? Now with that being said, if our character Atsu in the game turns out to be gay, oh my god, are we going to have a field day with that video, alright? But for the time being, we just don't know yet. Now I know this doesn't have to be said, but I'm going to say it anyway. Please do not harass the actress, okay? Insanity aside, she's pretty cute, not gonna lie. Now, as if things weren't bad enough, we also have this man, Sean Layton, an executive at Sony, our Megamind Giga Chad, who went on Twitter and said, and I quote, "If you don't like it, then don't buy it. In fact, why not make the game you want yourself?" This is a person who holds a high position in the company, okay? This is the guy who makes the big decisions, right? This is the guy who drives the Ferrari to work and then thinks to himself, you know what? You know what would be a good idea? How about we further antagonize our players whose money provides for our livelihood, okay? That's a good idea. This is like saying, if you don't like us smashing these babies into the trees, then perhaps look the other way. And please note that we had the atrocity that was Concord just a few weeks back, right? And now we have this guy. Are these people undercover agents sent by Xbox to sabotage Sony? Because if they are doing a damn good job at making sure that people aren't going to buy any Sony products. But I digress. Despite all of this juicy drama, we are here for a different purpose. Okay, now, in order to determine whether or not female Ronin was a thing, we have to first look at what is a Ronin, alright? We really don't have time to go into details, so I'm just gonna give you a short version. So basically, a Ronin is a masterless samurai. A samurai who doesn't serve any lord. Ronins were basically vagrants, aimless wanderers. Sometimes they do other stuff, but most of the time they kill people for money, right? They're mercenaries. Also, sometimes they band together and work as a group. And it is not a good thing to be a Ronin. I can't emphasize enough just how not good of a thing this is to be. When you watch movies like Seven Samurai, Yojimbo, Sanjuro, all that kind of stuff, it is easy to fall in love with the image of a wandering swordsman, a masterless warrior who wanders around killing bandits and saving the weak. In most of these movies, the Ronin, the main characters, are often caught in the middle of a power struggle between two clans. Sometimes the Ronin would swoop in and save the innocents caught in the crossfire. But most of the time, they just want to be left alone. Now, all of that might sound cool and all, but I can assure you it is very much fantasy. People avoid these guys like billionaires avoid paying taxes, right? Though not always, civilians often treat these Ronins how AAA game companies treat their customers nowadays, with utter disdain. Now, why is this the case? Well, let's look at the role of the samurai in the society of feudal Japan. So it's like this. A samurai is a social class. To be a samurai means you are a nobleman, okay? Most of the time, you are often born into the social class. You're born into being a samurai. Sometimes you can get adopted, but it's very difficult and it is very rare for that to happen. Now, with all that established, a samurai served a lord. Back then in feudal Japan, and especially in the Sengoku period, war is basically the default setting. You want to know what life was like? Just imagine playing a game of Age of Empires, okay? But you're playing against extreme AI and they keep forming alliances and ganging up on you, okay? And you are the peasant. So as you can imagine, living in a time like that, when you go into battle, you either win or you die and they chop your head off as a trophy. Just think kill confirmed in Call of Duty, but instead of dog tags, they collect your head and use it to literally level up. Yeah, back then, the samurai leveled up. They gained ranks by chopping your head off and collecting them as trophies, right? It's insane. Now, this is where we come to a concept that is so deeply misunderstood, mostly because of the way it is portrayed in Western media. The concept of honor. And please note, the honor we're talking about is not Bushido, okay? Bushido is a relatively new concept that was invented in the early Edo period, right? And this honor is different. When you are a samurai, you gain honor by serving your lord, okay? This is not Western chivalry. This is different. You are expected by your lord and by society as a whole to obey and carry out the orders of your lord without any question. You go where they tell you to go and kill who they tell you to kill. If your lord tells you to go put a sword through your neighbor Sasuke and burn his house down because he maybe is a spy, you go and you do it, all right? You don't question him. Because if you don't, you better have a PowerPoint presentation and a thesis on why you think is not a good idea. Failure to do so is one of the quickest way to disgrace your entire lineage and becoming a Ronin through exile, provided that your lord doesn't order you to commit seppuku, okay? Another way to become a Ronin is when your lord dies, whether in combat, incompetence, or assassination. Well, you are expected to do the honorable thing in this situation and just disembowel yourself and follow your lord. But you can choose to not do that and become a Ronin. In a society like feudal Japan, when finding one's place in a hierarchy is so very important, it is easy to see how a samurai who dishonors his lord is hated and discriminated against, which is why a Ronin leads a very difficult life, similar to that of YouTubers without subscribers. So, if you're enjoying the video, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. Thank you. Now that we have established what a Ronin is, let's take a look at the other part of the equation, the female warrior. Now, I like badass women, okay? I like women that can do flying arm bars and crush me with her thighs while whispering honeyed words into my ears as I lose consciousness. So it pains me to say this, but female warriors were extremely rare in feudal Japan. Now, that is not to say that there weren't any, okay? In fact, according to historically written documents, there were female warriors. But compared to the sheer number of male warriors back then, female warriors were a dime a dozen. Now let's take a look at some of these ladies. Arguably one of the most, if not the most, famous female warrior figures is Tomoe Gozen. She lived in the late Heian period, which is a very long time before the Sengoku period, but I think it's important to look at this figure, okay? I'll explain why later. She's described as especially beautiful with white skin, long hair, and charming features. She was also a remarkably strong archer, and as a swordswoman, she was a warrior worth 1,000, ready to confront a demon or a god mounted or on foot. She handled unbroken horses with superb skill. She rode unscathed down perilous descents. Whether a battle was imminent, Yoshinaka sent her out as his first captain, equipped with strong armor, an oversized sword, and a mighty bow, and she performed more deeds of valor than any of his other warriors. Sounds cool, right? Tomoe Gozen served as the first captain to this guy, Yoshinaka, during the Genpei War, though it is uncertain what happened to her after her lord's defeat. Okay? Now keep this point in mind. It is uncertain what happened to her. Now, while it is entirely possible for Tomoe Gozen to be as awesome and as badass as the story depicts, we also have to take into account the fact that most of these depictions came from the Heike Monogatari, the Tale of the Heike, which is a book described as the Japanese Iliad. Okay? And similar to the Iliad, most of the stories are told through words of mouth with a high degree of exaggeration, and events were often blended with legends, alright? And adding to that, we don't even know if she existed or not. Because she doesn't appear in any of the primary accounts in the Genpei War. Okay, but how does this get us any closer to the female Ronin? Just bear with me, okay? Everything will become clear after we take a look at a few more notable female warriors. During the Sengoku period, there were many accounts of women fighting on the battlefield. But please note that fighting on the battlefield has many nuances to it. So it's like this. If you have a higher rank in the army, most likely you're not going to be the one who is charging headfirst into the enemy's line. Most of the time, your job would to just sit back and issue orders to your soldiers. Now, I'm not saying that it didn't happen. All I'm saying is if your job was to command, then you would command. Kinda a spoiler alert here, but most of these ladies who are important enough to be documented in history, they had a very high position in the hierarchy, okay? They were princesses, ladies, female warlords. You're not going to see any foot soldiers here. Now, another notable female warrior or female warlord in this case is Yoshioka Miorini. Just to put things into perspective, okay? This woman was so hardcore that it is said her contributions changed the entirety of Japanese history, okay? It changed the course of Japanese history. This woman was a dami mommy, right? She can step on me if she likes. But I know that she wouldn't because she was stepping on much more powerful people back then. Yeah, she was a female warlord, so she commanded armies. Now this is a fun fact. Her real name is not Miorini. Her real name as well as her origins of birth remains unknown to this day. This is the case because most likely before Miorini came into power, she was just a regular woman. So there would be no point in documenting her life back then. The name Miorini was the name that she adopted after she became a nun. Putting all of that aside, even though her real name and birthplace is unknown, Miorini was in fact a real-life female warrior and warlord. But guess what happens to her? So the last clan that she served in was the Otomo clan, and when they failed in battle, they lost power and went into exile. The fate of Miorini became unknown. So she just disappeared and nobody knew what happened after that. It is if they stopped caring after you lose. Another notable figure was Kaihime, or Princess Kai or Lady Kai. She's known for her bravery when she helped her father defend against the siege of the castle Oshi. But get this is f***ed up. The guy who she was defending against was Toyomi Hideyoshi. But later on, they failed in defending the castle and she became the wife to Hideyoshi, which is f***ed up on so many levels. But it was the society back then, so you just gotta have to deal with it, right? It is said that she became a nun much later on. So at this point, if you are keeping count, we've had 2 undocumented fates, 1 nun, and 0 Ronin so far. Now we're getting somewhere. It's starting to make sense to you yet? Okay, now let's do some rapid fire, right? Onami Hime or Princess Onami. You know the Yotei clan from Total War Shogun 2? Yeah, the guys with the charge bonus. It's complicated, but basically she was born into the Yotei clan. She was then married off to this guy who she had 2 sons with. And when her 2 sons died, she became owner of this castle and came into power. And then she fought against the Yotei clan. She fought against her nephew at that time who was in power in the Yotei clan. Many things happened during her life, but guess what? She died of old age. Next, we have Yododono or Princess Cha-Cha. You know in the show Shogun on FX? In that show, there's a character named Lady Ochiba. That character was based on Princess Cha-Cha that we're talking about. She was a very powerful woman known for leading the anti-Tokugawa shogunate resistance with her son in the siege of Castle Osaka. But long story short, it is said that Princess Cha-Cha and her son committed suicide when the castle at Osaka fell. But here's the fun part. Their bodies were never found in the castle. So many people speculate that she and her son somehow escaped and they went into hiding. So maybe we'll chalk it up to unknown fate. Now at this point, I'm sure it is clear to see that historical documentations of female warriors back then were very sparse, and most of which end up with them being dead or fate unknown. Now take into account that most of these ladies that we just looked at, they were very important historical figures, and there were no mention of them being Ronin. So other female warriors who weren't important enough to be documented have basically zero chance at being documented female Ronin. Which is kind of surprising to me because I was expecting at least 1 or 2 accounts. There were historical documents of female wandering pilgrims, wandering merchants, but basically 0 female Ronins. And speaking of merchants, thank you to all of my patrons for making this video possible, and a special shout out to Oseyeris in the Lobotomized tier. I know that there are only 2 at the moment, but you guys are literally keeping me alive at this point. So if you want to support the channel, check out the Patreon. Plus, you get early access to my side note if you opt for the highest tier. So what are you waiting for? Undoubtedly, there are many other female warriors, and many of them might have been Ronins, but their existence is slowly leaning towards 0 when you take into account the fact that none of these documents mention a female Ronin, and when you take into account the next point that I'm going to discuss. What is it, you ask? Well, is the life and the role of a woman in Japanese society. As mentioned before, Ghost of Yotei is set in the year 1603, which is at the very end of the Sengoku period and the very beginning of the Edo period. And even though there are many differences, the role of the woman basically remains unchanged. If you watch my channel a lot, you'd know that I like to joke around, okay? I like to say some wild things. But the one thing I'm not is misogynistic. I am not misogynistic, okay?
I am not misogynistic, okay?
Because women are gross. Which is all she was good for, because anytime she had to get her hands dirty and actually fight, she failed spectacularly. Women, am I right, fellas? And proceeds to carve her way through the remaining enemies using her knife. Looks like all that time in the kitchen finally paid off. So please don't take me out of context when I say that women in feudal Japan were treated like objects. Arguably even more so in the Edo period, which the game is set in. Look at it like this. Back then, most people were laborers. They were farmers, they were craftsmen, they were merchants, etc. Peasant men were often mass conscripted into the army and became ashigaru whenever there's a war breaking out, which was basically once a week. Naturally, with all the men gone, the women will have to take care of everything. And adding to that, women were viewed as merchandise to be traded, either for power, business, or connection. This is why weddings were so big back then, because you were basically selling your goddamn daughter to another family in exchange for other commodities. Granted, not all families were like this, but it was the social norm. While samurai gained honor by serving their lord, women gain honor by marrying into a family that can benefit their family. If they were lucky, they would meet a husband who loves them and takes care of them. If they're not, they suffer a miserable existence to the end of their lives. And this is expected of them. And women, they consider this the right thing to do. It's the social norm. It's not easy being a woman, okay? But at least you don't have to go to war and then get stabbed and die immediately. Now, I'm sure there were women who disliked and even rebelled against their role in this society. But just put yourself in their shoes and think about it. Realistically, can a peasant woman with no prior martial arts training just grab a sword, leave her family, and go fight some random bandits in the forest? What are her chances of survival? You know what's gonna happen? You take 2 steps out of your village and you get SA'd by a bunch of bandits and sold to a brothel halfway across the country. And assuming that you haven't been eaten by wild animals like bears and wolves. Yeah, it's tough. And don't get me wrong, this went for men as well. Just that you don't get sold to brothels because you were already dead. Take a look at Aikiko from next door, okay? Now Aikiko is not crazy. Sure, her life is fucking miserable and she hates her husband, but at least she doesn't have to live in the woods on some insects and mushroom and worry about having to not die from hypothermia, right? And when her drunkard husband eventually dies, she can live as a widow in a house that is her own. You see what I'm getting at? It's not a realistic lifestyle for a woman back then. As much as I don't find Blue Eye Samurai entertaining, the one thing the show does well is showing you how it was to travel around in the Edo period. Long story short, when you want to travel, you needed a pass, which was basically a piece of paper stating what your business was and your reasons for traveling. Furthermore, women were expected to be accompanied by a man on their travels. There are so many accounts of women being harassed by officials and soldiers when they didn't have a man accompanying them. This is why the main protagonist in that show, Mizu, she disguises herself as a man so as to avoid all of the hassle. This also gives her the advantage of not being attacked on sight by a bunch of bandits because, surprise surprise, a man is less likely to get attacked than a woman. So now let's put all of these points together, shall we? We know that a Ronin is a masterless samurai. They are considered bad and people generally don't like talking to them. We also know that most of the female warriors depicted in historical documents either died of old age, in combat, or disappeared without a trace, so they can't have become documented female Ronins. Or if they did become Ronin, it was undocumented. And finally, we know that there weren't many incentives for women to leave their house, pick up a sword, and become a wandering Ronin, as it would have been, quite frankly, an unrealistic and unsustainable lifestyle. So, when you put all of these points together, what does it all mean? Well, I don't know. This video is just for fun, right? You can come to your own conclusions, but in my opinion, and from what I've seen here, being a female Ronin was pretty unrealistic to say the least. Comment out what you think about the situation. I make sure to read every single comment. Subscribe and stay tuned to witness my gradual descent into insanity. If you don't, you might find yourself waking up in a brothel in Mozambique.
Hey, Skull Guy here. You should check out other videos on the channel. They are just as awesome.